I want a son. I am marrying my mistress for a son. 5 years later he finds me with my husband. I can still remember the exact moment my world shattered. The memory is etched into my mind like a scar that will never fully fade. It was a Wednesday afternoon, clear and bright, with sunlight spilling through the kitchen windows. I had just finished folding a load of tiny baby clothes, freshly washed and scented with lavender fabric softener. My hand rested briefly on my belly, a habit I had formed over the past 6 months. The gentle flutter of life stirred within me, and I smiled softly, imagining holding my baby for the first time. I was 6 months pregnant with my first child, a child my husband, Daniel, and I had prayed for, tried for, and celebrated with tears of joy when the test finally came back positive. And yet, despite all the warmth of that memory, the coldness of what came next still haunts me. Daniel came home early from work, which was unusual. His expression was cold, distant. I remember how he didn't kiss me hello or glance at the baby bump he once adored. He sat down across from me at the kitchen table, his hands trembling slightly. Then, in a voice so flat it was almost robotic, he said the words that would destroy me. "Amelia, I want a divorce." For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. Surely, he had meant something else. He couldn't be saying that. What? I stammered, still folding a tiny pink onesie, unable to look up. My hands shook violently, and I pressed the fabric into my lap, as if holding on to something small and soft could anchor me. "I've made up my mind," he said, emotionless. "I've been unhappy for a long time. I want out." I blinked at him, confused, certain there had to be some misunderstanding. This was Daniel, my husband, the man who had held me while I cried over the negative pregnancy tests, the man who had kissed my stomach every night and whispered promises to our unborn child. "Daniel. What are you talking about?" My voice cracked. "We're having a baby. You can't just leave." But he was already shaking his head. "I'm sorry," he muttered coldly. "It's over." I felt the blood drain from my face. My vision blurred with tears. My heart pounded violently against my chest, making it difficult to breathe. And then he stood, and with the casual finality of someone walking away from a mere acquaintance, he left. The divorce papers arrived the next day. Neatly printed. Emotionless. I sat in the nursery we had decorated together, soft pastel wallpaper, a rocking chair in the corner, a wooden crib he had assembled only weeks before. My fingers traced the edges of the papers. And when my tears finally spilled, they fell in hot, heavy droplets onto the cruel ink that spelled the end of my marriage. 2 weeks later, I learned the truth. Daniel had been having an affair. Not a brief fling. Not a one-time mistake. No. He had been seeing her, for nearly 2 years. Her name was Stephanie. She was younger, slimmer, with silky blonde hair that cascaded down her back in perfect waves. I knew her face well, having once seen it in photos from one of Daniel's company retreats. I remember how he'd brushed off my suspicions back then. Now, I knew why. She was 6 months pregnant, the same as me. Only she was carrying Daniel's son. The boy he had always wanted. He had left me, his wife, the woman he once promised to cherish forever, because his mistress was giving him what I couldn't. Or, at least, what I wasn't guaranteed to give him. I didn't know yet if I was having a boy or a girl. That small, cruel fact made his betrayal all the more gut-wrenching. The months that followed were a blur of pain, disbelief, and numbness. I stopped answering calls from friends who offered their pity. I declined my mother's invitations to visit because I couldn't bear to see the heartbreak in her eyes. I spent hours curled up in the rocking chair in the nursery, staring at the empty crib. The baby kicked and squirmed inside me, a tiny beacon of life in my sea of despair. When the time came, I gave birth alone. Her name was Lily. She came into the world with a sharp, indignant cry and a full head of dark hair that immediately reminded me of Daniel. But when I held her against my chest, none of that mattered. She was mine. The nurses handed me papers with the option to put Daniel's name on the birth certificate. I stared at the blank line for a long time before I finally shook my head. No, I whispered. He's not her father. Biology be damned, he had forfeited the right to that title. For the next 5 years, it was just Lily and me. For the first year after Daniel left, I lived in survival mode. I worked tirelessly, fueling my days with cheap coffee and my nights with restless, tear-stained exhaustion. Sleep became a rare luxury. My days were filled with deadlines and baby bottles, and my nights were spent soothing Lily when she cried, her tiny fingers clutching my shirt, unaware of the heartbreak that had consumed her mother. I was determined to give her a good life. Even when I felt hollow inside, I smiled for her. I tickled her little toes, made funny faces, and sang lullabies with a voice so cracked and weary it sometimes made me cry once she fell asleep. But no matter how tired I was, I woke up every morning and fought like hell. I took on extra freelance marketing projects in the evenings, long after Lily had gone to bed. I worked during her naps on weekends, barely stopping to eat. The money Daniel had once provided was gone, and I wasn't about to ask for child support. I didn't want a single cent from him. I would raise Lily on my own, no strings attached. And so, through sleepless nights and endless sacrifices, I slowly rebuilt. Within 2 years, I had saved enough money to rent a modest but cozy 2-bedroom house. It had a small backyard with a patch of overgrown grass that Lily loved tumbling in. I planted daisies along the edge of the fence, and each morning, she would run outside barefoot, squealing, "Mama, look at the flowers." I watched her, my heart swelling with love, and I knew I had made it through the darkest storm of my life. But my heart was still closed off, walled up behind the betrayal Daniel had left behind. I was determined to focus solely on Lily and myself. And then, Ethan walked into my life. It wasn't a fairy tale, whirlwind romance. No, it was quiet and steady, like the gentle tide slowly erasing footprints in the sand. He came into my life softly, without force or expectation. We met at a mutual friend's small gathering, a simple backyard barbecue. I wasn't looking for anyone. I had convinced myself that I was fine alone, that my heart had no room left for anyone else. But Ethan didn't try to charm me or sweep me off my feet. He simply sat beside me with his easy, genuine smile and listened. He asked about my work, my passions, and Lily. He didn't probe or pry into my past. He was just there. Present. Warm. Over the next few months, we saw each other at more gatherings. He would always make time for Lily, letting her sit on his shoulders and giggle as he galloped around like a horse. He never spoke down to her, he treated her with the same kindness and respect he showed everyone else. One day, after he had spent hours playing with Lily at the park, he asked if I wanted to get coffee sometime. My heart fluttered unexpectedly, and against all the walls I had built around it, I said yes. Our first date wasn't flashy. It was simple, a stroll through a local farmer's market. We sipped on fresh lemonade, walked hand in hand, and talked about everything and nothing. And somehow, piece by piece, I let him in. Ethan was nothing like Daniel. He didn't make grand promises or offer extravagant gifts. Instead, he was reliable. He showed up. Always. He was there when Lily had a fever. He was there when my car broke down. He was there when I woke up from a nightmare, trembling from old memories. He didn't try to fix me. He simply held me and let me know I wasn't alone. And slowly, I realized that I was falling in love again. It had been 5 years since Daniel walked out on me, and I was finally happy. Truly, deeply happy. It was a warm summer evening when my past came crashing back into my life. Ethan, Lily, and I were in the backyard. Lily was chasing bubbles, her joyful laughter ringing through the air. Ethan sat beside me on the porch swing, his arm draped protectively around my shoulders. My heart felt fuller than I ever thought possible. Then my phone rang. I almost ignored it, but the name on the screen made my stomach clench. Claire. My childhood friend. She rarely called unexpectedly, which made her sudden call feel ominous. I answered, pressing the phone to my ear. Amelia, Claire's voice was breathless, frantic. You need to check the news. Right now. My brows furrowed. The news? What? Just check it, she interrupted, her voice filled with urgency. I pulled up the news app on my phone, my hands trembling slightly as I scrolled. And then I saw it. Daniel's face. His smug, polished, all too familiar face, plastered on the screen beneath a glaring headline, Tech CEO Daniel Carter exposed, paternity fraud scandal. I blinked, unsure if I was seeing it right. My stomach churned violently. I clicked the article, and my breath caught in my throat. The woman Daniel had left me for, the woman who had lured him away with the promise of the son he had always wanted, had deceived him. The boy Daniel had abandoned me for wasn't his. A DNA test had confirmed it. Stephanie, the perfect, poised mistress, had been sleeping with another man the entire time she was with Daniel. And now, the truth was public knowledge. Daniel was being dragged through the media, ridiculed and humiliated for blindly trusting her. The scandal rocked his reputation. Investors were pulling out of his company. The board was rumored to be considering removing him. His marriage to Stephanie was already over. She had left him, taking the boy with her. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling slightly. My breath came in short, sharp gasps, but I wasn't sure if it was disbelief or relief. Ethan, noticing my shaken expression, gently took the phone from my hands. His eyes scanned the article, and then he exhaled slowly. He turned to me, his voice low and steady. Amelia. Are you okay? I blinked, my lips parting slightly. And then I let out a slow, shaky breath. And to my own surprise, I laughed. Not a cruel or vengeful laugh. No. It was a laugh of pure, unshackled freedom. The man who had destroyed me, who had tossed me aside for the promise of something better, had lost everything. And the most beautiful part was that I didn't care. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to call him or scream, I told you so. I was free. In the days that followed, Daniel tried to reach out. He left voicemails. He sent emails. He even wrote a letter. He wanted to meet. To talk. To explain. But I never responded. I had no anger left for him. No hatred. No grief. No regret. I simply didn't care. Lily was 6 years old now. She called Ethan Daddy without hesitation, without confusion. Because that was who he was. He had been the one who had stayed. The one who held her when she was sick. The one who read her bedtime stories and kissed her skinned knees. One evening, Ethan took me to the park where we had shared our first date. Under the same oak tree, with the same golden sunlight filtering through the branches, he knelt down on one knee and pulled out a small velvet box. Amelia, he whispered, his voice trembling slightly. I never knew what real love was until I met you. I want to spend the rest of my life with you and Lily. Will you marry me? I didn't cry. I didn't hesitate. I smiled and whispered, yes. We married in a small ceremony in our backyard, with Lily as our flower girl. Her hair was done up in small, uneven pigtails, and she tossed petals with wild, uncoordinated joy. And as Ethan kissed me beneath the sunlit sky, with Lily giggling beside us, I knew with absolute certainty, I was whole again. I was loved. And I was finally free.